I'm back.
And
so is he.
so am I. Hi, my name is Steve.
I'm Ian.
And together we are writing this game called Downbelow. It's been a crazy mixed up trip so far, and a lot of it we're discovering from the seat of our pants, and so are you.
And one thing that you need to discover that we're going to start a series on now is some specific examples on success and failure. Because we've talked about theories and we've talked about general uses, but we're going to get specific for you because a lot of games, except for some very well-known, well-trod areas like combat and other very physical action-oriented things, can lack a lot of specific examples about how you apply success and failure in the system, and we're going to fix that for ours.
So, for those of you just for joining us, and for those of you in need of a refresher, let's put some ground rules down for this mini-series we're doing here. We are writing a game called Downbelow. The setting itself is specifically a cyberpunk noir setting, but the system conceit is that everything is handled equally. There are no overarching attributes. Instead, characters have functionally a success pool defined by various traits on their character sheet.
You are good at certain things, and you as the player get to choose to say, because I am good at this thing, I succeed a certain number of times. Or you can choose to say, no, I'm going to not apply one of my traits and fail at this challenge. Then you get to refresh traits.
The basic conceit is that in every session and or adventure, depending on how you slice it up, there are a certain number of successes necessary before failure. For instance, in a 4-hour session with a 6-player game, you are looking at requiring something about 70 successes, give or take, over the course of the entire night.
Which means that it's going to be really important for you to know what each of those gives, because you're often going to want to put up challenges where the players are going to want to spend more than one trait at once, and you want to figure out what that gets them per trait.
Well, more specifically, that's something we have just barely touched on, the possibility to spend more than one trait at once. When we were talking about this, we did realize that, there's a wide gray area. This is not a problem that is suffering, that just our game is suffering from. Let's look at the grandfather of them all, Dungeons and Dragons. In combat, it's very simple. You and your opponents have pools of hit points. There are very clearly defined, depending on some editions define this more clearly than others, but looking at the most current edition and even the last two, 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition, very clearly defined rules for how a given check can interact with the environment. If you want to push a monster off a cliff, you know you need to make a certain type of attack roll, and your strength plus your roll determines how far you can push them, followed by the falling damage from going off the cliff. Very cleanly defined.
But in certain cases, unless you're using a magic spell that has a very specific effect, such as a divination, then when you're gathering information, such as in the original version of 3rd edition using the gather information skill, or later using the diplomacy skill which rolled that function in, then you get how much information per check? The skill description gives you a very vague general description of this.
Usually
and
boiling down
adventures
to
might have specific information that you get at certain DCs, but the GM has a very vague idea.
And while the rules actually state stuff such as one piece of information, and more important as you go higher in difficulty, really if you're gathering information, the GM is not technically prohibited from making what some might consider a bad faith move of saying, I'm trying to gather information about the location of this hidden treasure. I made a perfectly reasonable gather information check, and I got the information that the treasure is probably hidden beneath this town, which is the whole reason we came to the town in the first place, and I've just wasted some playtime and a success.
But how specific is the piece of information supposed to be based on what difficulty of check? So that's the kind of specific example we're going to give you for our system.
Hopefully you can take the examples and the proportions that we're going to give you in the upcoming days and weeks and actually use them for anything. They're going to be geared towards ours, but in this case, in addition to specificity, we are going a little bit system agnostic here.
So next time we're going to start with that subject we started into a little bit, gathering information because it's very important in cyberpunk noir genre.
Yep.
See you next time.